What is this phenomenon, play, which in a sense is so familiar, but at the same time so difficult to pin down or describe?
Most people have never thought about play consciously if you casually asked people what they thought play was. They wouldn't think it was terribly important almost to know the answer. And yet, in academic life, you spend a lot of time thinking it's extremely important to know the answer, and a lot of people think they've found it.
Well, it's not everything. And if you call it the kind of negative of life, that makes it quite clearly something that has to be in opposition to the rest of everything. Because we are constrained. I mean, it's easier to define the other things than to define play, and everybody's had that problem. I have to eat. I have to go to work. I have to sit here while you do this camera work. But then all those can be negated. And where's the area of negation? It's that attitude where you switch off the regularities, the customs, the expectancies, and let your mind reverse them or go off in a kind of heedless, undirected way into caves of its own excitement, as it were. My metaphor for this is it's like a turn-off button. That is, you can turn it off at any time, or turn it on momentarily. While somebody else is talking, you're playing in your mind. You're saying, no, I don't buy that. I buy some other possibility. Well, your greatest success would be to edit the film so that I gave you the answer to the wrong question. And sometimes an answer to no question and things of that kind. I mean, you could really make a Harpo Marx series out of this whole thing through editing, perhaps. See, while the camera's going on, everybody's got their job. The cameraman's going, you've got to think of a question, I've got to know that an answer has to come, and I've got all those answers already laid on anyway. All these are kinds of life logs. They're life scripts. We have all these scripts around us all the time. And it's only each time we free ourselves from one of these, even momentarily, that we get a sense of a lift. And I think that's what play's about. It's very difficult to do it, though, unless you keep breaking up the action. Because I think that there's various kinds of play. See, we don't want to give the idea that anything we can say is play as such. There's many things you can say that can be play. So I could take all the strips of film and throw them on the floor and run a random kind of thing, and I might laugh about that and so on. On the other hand, I could take the pieces of film and I could make a very good translation from one place to another, and yet have a sense of, hey, this is really different. This is not the way it usually is. When they see this man, you know? And that sense of possibility in me would be playful, although my matching would be very careful and like throwing it on the floor, you know? In all play, something plays off something else. A sense of freedom, or difference, I'd rather say difference. A sense of difference plays off something that's customary. And usually in our culture in these days, the sense of difference is a sense of freedom too. Once you say that we want to make this play-like, so the medium is the message, the problem with that is that that's immediately a serious thought. In other words, you've given us a script for how we should do this, which is to make it play-like. But you can't make it play-like by that kind of intention. And the way for us to make it play-like with that kind of intention is to be terribly serious. Do you get it? So that the very intention can have play only as its reversal. And that's why I've been serious all the time. What's in my head as play is not necessarily in your head. And the problem we have to try to solve is how we find the word here. Every word meaning allows a play of meaning. And so when we finally arrive at the word itself, it's not surprising it takes about a page to define it.
Okay, let's go. Right him again.
How did you begin to be interested in play yourself?
Mainly because my father was a fairly authoritarian kind of guy. He always knew what the answer was. I sat in the back seat and made wisecracks. And in those wisecracks, found in that kind of leeway, my own autonomous life in relation to him. And then later, found in studying the subject seriously, I turned around and became his kind of an authority with my kind of content. Something like that, you know. My brother was a very rebellious character. He went to school. He never wanted to go to school, so he'd go into his classroom and he'd get in the science cupboards and rattle the pipes. When the master came in, the master would be running around. He used to take little trumpets down his shirt and blow them. And he finally achieved what he was after. He got dropped.
Yeah.
He didn't actually get expelled, but he sunk from A to B to C to D to E in one of these graded kinds of... And he got off to be the farmer that he wanted to be, and he ended up being a successful farmer. So that, in a sense, I dare say I did grow up in a climate where the model of my brother was that play, the most joyful play was against authority. You know? Yeah, that's true. I used to throw ink around the classroom when I was in the fourth form. I used to love the old plunger fountain pens, you know. You had to make it, just had to go right. As you threw your arm like that, you had to go like this. And the ink went in the spray right across the classroom, you know. The master would be looking at the desk, and all of a sudden, all these yells from all the other kids going, oh. So I'm back here. By then I'm doing this, you see. What's that? Oh.
Who, me, sir? Me?
Not so, not I, sir. And so on.
But I want to ask you something. You're talking about rebelliousness.
That's secret play, yes, that's part of it.
Yeah, but no, I'm not sure that it is. You're talking about rebelliousness and
Yes.
about having fun.
Yeah.
And it is fun to be rebellious.
Yes, right.
Now, why is that play? What's the play?
I think the actual acts of play insofar as you're conniving with a bunch of other boys, you know that it's a not supposed to be done thing, it's not the right behavior in there. It's play, I must admit, it's like the play where boys ride, they speed in front of police stations and motor cars playing chicken. It's a kind of play which is bordered onto another cultural reality. Yeah, there's some kinds of play which have this radical kind of import. I wouldn't call all play like this, but there are kinds of play which border so much on changing the nature of society that they're radical kinds of play. Play has that potential. Most of the time it's probably fairly conservative because it's an imitation, if a mimicry of the way things are, and you're just being mother like mother is. You're not really, apart from being the mother yourself, you're not in a revolution. Manager would say you were being in a revolution by taking her place, you know, but other than that, everything you do is fairly prosaic and nobody's going to be upset.
I think what's playful about what you've described is that it is behaviour that is out of context.
So why are fire engines red? Because 1 and 1 is 2, 2 times 2 is 4, 3 times 4 is 12. There are 12 inches in a ruler. Queen Mary was a ruler. Queen Mary ruled the sea. There are fish in the sea. The fish have fins. The Finns fought the Russians. The Russians are red. Fire engines are always Russian, therefore fire engines are red. And that's a wonderful series of linkages that have to do with similarities in sound more than they have to do with the kind of logical meanings that adults seem to stress. And I think that's very typical of the ways in which younger children play with language, and I think that it has to do with the shape of language in their head at particular points in their development. One of the critical aspects of play and of speech play is that it allows one to come up with alternatives, to see that there are other ways that language can be organized, that there are other ways in which meaning can be organized, and it's that kind of proliferation of alternatives that's essential to any kind of artistic process.
Again, I find the subversive element in it, you know, the sort of making
Yes.
nonsense of the world.
Sure, it's subversive because, I mean, kids will even say that why do things have to make sense all the time? At the
Yeah.
kind of tyrannical demand that things should always make sense. And so that not making sense is something that kids revel in. And I do believe that our artists revel in it as well, because not to make sense gives you license to make a different kind of sense.
Knock knock.
Who's there?
Old lady.
Old lady who?
Never knew you could yodel.
Knock knock.
Who's there?
Who's there? Let us.
Let us who?
Let us in and you'll find out. I've got knock knock.
Right.
Knock knock.
Who's there?
Felix.
Felix who?
Felix, my lolly, I'll bash him. I'm a robot president. I'm a robot president. What robot president am I? Don't you know?
No?
President Reagan. Kill with his name. Why can you kill with his name, Jeremy? Reagan. It's called Reagan.
But the kids mainly take a delight in the contradiction, don't they?
Oh, sure, because it's a kind of subversion.
Yeah.
It's a little revolution.
Are riddles like that?
I think very much so. In fact, it's. I think there's a wonderful insight from your very own work about how riddles work that I think is really very, very true to them. And your own suggestion that what kids get to do is to reverse a power, that they hold the power because they hold the answer.
What we caught, we didn't keep. What we kept, we didn't catch. And I know the answer to that. What? A flea?
The point is that the riddler holds the control over deciding what is the acceptable answer. Or what did one flea say to the other flea?
Shall we take a
No, shall we? Oh? Shall we?
take a car or walk?
No, shall we walk or take a dog?
Oh, take a dog, sorry.
So that's, some of them are, I think...
But I nicely illustrated how one of these kids would say it. See?
Exactly.
Hadn't quite got it.
Exactly, and
Sorry about
the arbitrary power of the riddler in deciding what would be acceptable.
What stands in the middle of Paris and wobbles? Trifle Tower.
Yeah, what's green and sings?
What's green and sings? A herring.
No, Elvis Parsley.
Elvis Parsley.
No,
great.
or Frank Snott.
Terrible.
What lies at the bottom of the sea and wobbles and shivers?
I don't know what lies at the bottom of the sea and shivers.
A nervous wreck.
You know what's brown and sits on the end of the piano stool?
Beethoven's Last Movement?
Yeah, Beethoven's Last Movement. That's another one. Doesn't do you any good at dinner time, does it, eh?
Well, look, kids, look what it... Kids do it so strategically because they understand exactly what's happening.
Yeah.
How can you, when you're sitting at a table, ingesting, talk about excreting? That is considered that's rudeness, social disgrace personified. And it's the social context that makes that joke even funnier as far as a child is concerned.
Yeah.
If they can get away with
That's true. Apparently there are divisions like, I understand children will tell some riddles that their parents can hear and will only tell you other ones when the parents can't hear. So they're kind of
censor.
aware of gradations.
Oh,
aren't they?
sure.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
I know just one good joke. Well, what's that? You know it, Tim. I'll just whisper it to you. Which one? Oh, that one.
So there's subversion of sound and subversion of syntax and subversion of semantics and subversion of society.
Absolutely.
But how many theories of play are there?
Well, maybe a couple of dozen reputable ones. The psychoanalytic one's been the major influence in the last 30 years or so, and basically what they say is that a person transforms himself through play, as I just gave the example. I mean, I transformed myself from being an impudent backseater into being a front-level lecturer on being an impudent backseater, you see. So that does fit Freudian theory, which is that you move from being a victim to being a hero, that all play is about being a hero. and the person who can't play is in some sort of trouble, and then he learns to play and he's out of trouble.
I lived under the same roof as a child and his parents for some weeks, and it was some time before I discovered the meaning of a puzzling activity that the child constantly repeated. This child had an occasional disturbing habit of taking small objects and throwing them away from him, into a corner, under the bed, and so on, so that hunting for them and picking them up was often quite a business. I eventually realised that it was a game, and that the only use he made of any of his toys was to play Gone with them. The interpretation of the game then became obvious. It was related to the child's great cultural achievement, the instinctual renunciation which he had made.
Freud's interpretation of this little game that the boy was doing is that he is reenacting the experience that he has when his mother leaves him and goes away and is out of sight and then comes back in again. But instead of being the passive recipient of this event, which means that he feels a certain amount of anxiety, he is actually making himself the active partner in the interaction, so that he is the one who is causing the go away to happen and the coming back to happen. So he's mastering it in a way. He is making himself the master of an event that had, in the first place, caused him a lot of anxiety. I've seen exactly the same thing happen with one of my own children. The first time I ever spent a night away from my firstborn child, I suppose he must have been about 1 3/4. And I came back after one night away, and I got a big hug, first of all, and then immediately a fat little hand in the face. Bang! Because he was cross with me for having gone away. And no more was said about it at the time. But the very next morning, he appeared round the edge of the bedroom door, saying, "Hello." And I looked pleased to see him. And then, "Bye-bye," he said, very crossly. Bang, went out, shutting the door. And he repeated this over and over and over again. "Hello, bye-bye, bang." And I had to be watching. When he came round the door and saying hello, it was no use if I was trying to read the newspaper or talking to my husband or whatever. I had to be watching so that he could leave me. He was the one in charge, and he was handing back to me the anxious and unhappy feelings that he'd had by my having left him in the first place.
The first games that children play extensively are chasing games which have homes in them. And the movement out from the home, out from the base, into the dangerous territories where you can be tagged and back again, seems to be an analogue of a child moving out from his home into the school and worldly territories and going back home at night. Children repeat and repeat and repeat going in and out of a safe base thousands and thousands of times. Actually, we estimated in one study we did that the children in that playground would go in and out of a safe base 500,000 times while they were at that school, given the sample of children we had and the amount of time we saw in a week. And you'd say, goodness grief, why do they do that so many times? 500,000 times? Well, I mean, at least we ought to be able to infer that that particular conflict over safeness and unsafeness is incredibly important to little children. And we can infer that the conflict that an adult has over immortality is incredibly important to adults too. Am I mortal? Will my soul be saved? Will I live again? I mean, so you go to church thousands, 500,000 times maybe, in order to play out your way of managing and thinking about and transcending that particular event. What a child is doing in his play is transforming things which he's victimized for in his life. In other words, in ordinary life, you're the passive receiver of all kinds of things. You're forced to wear clothes, to go to bed at certain times, to hold a spoon in a certain way, and so on.
Oh, you're right
you don't have any control over that. The little person, very powerless, comes into the world of giants, and all these things must happen, or else the giants don't feel happy because you're not clean, you're not behaving properly, and so on.
No, you play nicely with it. Come on.
It's only because of the transformations of the play, well, Freud would say, the child plays these things through, pretends to be a giant, him or herself, and gets some sense of comfort about it.
I just came to a stop halfway at the wheel.
Most people know Freud for the notion that your anxieties are released, that your tensions are released. In fact, you can ask almost anybody why they play any game, tennis, gambling, they'll all tell you, tension release. It releases my tensions. And it's so Freudian notions, if not Aristotelian ones, have become a folk saying. Whether tensions are actually released, we don't know. What I like to think is that's a hydraulic kind of image, like you got some bad fluids and they've got to get punctured and come out of you. I think that's a preliminary and only partially correct kind of notion. What I think is that the alternative selves that are in you get exercised. Part of the enjoyment of play is that you control that up and down of emotion, that arousal of emotion.
Where's Dada?
Boom! Who was that? Who was that?
Say, where's Dada?
Fever!
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16.
Kids vary a great deal in terms of whether they will maximise the amount of arousal and excitement they're getting. And they clearly can manipulate their own terror. If it's getting a bit too terrifying, you can stay under the bush and hide. But if you want a little bit more, you dance out and say to the bogeyman, you can't catch me, and so on. Alternative systems of behaviours which have not generally been a part of the way you've accommodated to life and what you regard as respectable, are allowed a play on the field. You've often felt these frustrations and angers, but in the play field you're allowed to show some of this. It's normal. It's an opportunity to have the whole of yourself as a part of your life rather than just a part of yourself. Alternative responses, fantasies that have never seen the light of day, do get the light of day here. They begin to be expressed in your play or through your football or whatever it is.
going to be frightened. There's frightening things in there.
Why is it fun?
Because it's a thrill, I think. It's a thrill
You
to
like
be
being
scared.
scared, don't you?
It's only pretense. I mean, being shut in a dark room is more scary than going into one of those haunted things.
So you know there's things in there that aren't really real, but
Just gives you a chance to be daft, really, doesn't it?
yeah.
I mean, we just laughed half the time, didn't we?
We get time off, probably go on that train thing. See what that's like. Trying to get the stomach feeling.
I like the roller coaster, it's exciting.
Well, just
a thrill, don't you?
a thrill, a good laugh, some element of danger in it.
That gets a bit boring after a while because you know you're never going to go off the edge. First time, you know, you sort of sit there with your eyes shut, but after 4 or 5 times, you get used to it.
It's a good sensation, like in the plane.
Excitement, a bit of adventure, you know, you don't normally get it outside. You know, it's really like another world in here. You know, you can do what you can't really do anywhere else. Out on the street, you can't go around sort of zapping things generally, can you? But here you can, you know, just stick 10p in a slot and you can zap things all you want.
And it's that kind of turning over of yourself, the other half, all the half of yourself that's reacted throughout your life to all your frustrations and all the rest of it, but never done anything about it, or some part of that gets expressed. I suppose, to give Freud the best possible credit here, perhaps there's a tension between the two systems that's released. I see the game myself as the expression of the other system of yourself, but surely there must be a tension between the official character and the unofficial character, or else the game and its moderate tensions wouldn't be found acceptable or interesting.
Which is the first theory to turn conventional notions about play on its head?
Dutchman, historian Huitzinger. A book called Homo Ludens. And in effect he said that play is the beginning of all culture. It's where it starts. Not the last part, the trivial leftovers, as you got out of the 19th century work ethic. That's the sort of thing you shouldn't really be doing. You should be in church. But, well, you know, a certain amount of it's got to happen, I guess. While you're children, when you grow up, you can give that up. That kind of theory, he turned on its head. He says, no way. He says, culture's always invented in the playful mind first.
Genuine, pure play is one of the main bases of civilization. Law and order, commerce and profit, craft and art, poetry, wisdom and science, all are rooted in the primeval soil of play. Just as there is no formal difference between play and ritual, so the consecrated spot cannot be formally distinguished from the playground. The arena, the card table, the magic circle, the temple, the stage, the screen, the tennis court, the court of justice, are all in form and function playgrounds, within which special rules obtain.
I think that what happens with the mall is that you have a set of premises, you have some materials, you have some rules, you have some conventions, and that sets some limits. And those limits are important because without limits, there's chaos. Limits are what create the feeling of a tradition, of a genre, of a style. And I don't consider limits, I mean, that somehow it has a negative ring to it. We think limits versus freedom. But it seems to me that its freedom exists within limits that are selected and understood. And that is essential to play, and it is essential to art. I wouldn't want to posit that a play was a prerequisite for everything, and so that seems to me to be too radical.
Yeah, that's true, yeah. He says actually that culture grows as play, not out of play, but as play. In other words, some of the things we noticed in play, that setting up organizations, having rules, having contests, having representations, are typical also of how culture develops its legal societies and its libraries and everything else. I think I would call this an idealized version of play, that people constantly confuse the constructive imagination with play, and I wouldn't want to do that. I think, for me, play is the more light-hearted, can go anywhere, slightly subversive kind of quality of association.
But you know, it's nice, though, as you formulated, it's a nice contrast to what we've been saying, which is that play is a subversion of the normal order of things, because the way we've been presenting it, though I don't think we have to stay with that, is that first you have the regular world, then you have a subversion of it called play. And this kind of turns that on its end and suggests that play is some very, very fundamental process out of which many of the important and social, cultural, artistic forms emerges, which is in fact what I feel happens with children. When I purchased this in Poland, it was purchased as a children's toy. But I'm interested in it because it is virtually identical to a grogger, a noisemaker, which has a serious ritual purpose on the holiday of Purim, where it's used to deaden, literally kill, the sound of the name of a villain in the story for the holiday. So that here's an object, the same physical object, which in one cultural context is a children's toy, therefore something to be played with. In another cultural context, it is virtually a ritual object to be used for serious purposes, to kill the sound of a name. So that it seems to me there are activities, similarly activities, ball games, which for us in some contexts are play, as paid sports, they're work, and in a Native American context, they're ritual. So the same act. The very virtue of the same act, the same object. I mean, here's another example, and that's this is a puppet. And we tend to think of puppet plays for fun and entertainment and for kids. This is a puppet for a religious folk drama for Christmas, which is a drama that's used for ritual purposes on a ritual occasion.
So anything can be played with, but no particular thing is necessarily play.
Ah, anything can be played with. That I would go along with completely.
But nothing,
virtually anything can be played with. However, not all, that is, it's the very, very same object or activity can count as play in one cultural setting and not in another. And I think that it's important to keep that in mind.
But you've used the word play in both those sentences. What did you mean?
Ah, well, I got to think about that. Because I don't have to cook normally, food is an area which is for me an area of play. And there's something so tangible about setting out to do something beautiful with food and doing it. I love to acquire all kinds of wonderful tools that elaborate and the whole process of cooking and food preparation in ways that go beyond what I would call the necessities of what you really need. They're for me a great joy and a great delight. I delight in the whimsy of a tool that is elaborated to accomplish a very simple function, to crack a nut, to squeeze a lemon, to mold or form a cookie or a cake. It seems to me that these are all ways in which a task that could be quite tedious and quite boring day to day can become not only artful, because it is artful, but also extremely playful.
Do you think it has something of the decorative function that decorativeness and decoration has in relation to art?
Yes, in fact, I think a lot of playfulness of art is maybe most clearly seen in things that have been called decorative. And unfortunately, decorative has a funny connotation, non-essential or non-serious, or somehow or other, to be decorative is almost a condemnation of an object. It's just decorative. That is to say, it's not serious, it doesn't mean something. But I have a feeling sometimes it's precisely the things that we call decorative that the play impulse is most fully realized.
So for you, decorative is a kind of expressive
Definitely,
aspect.
yes, and definitely. And I would almost try to find another word, because I feel it suggests something trivial, superficial, or marginal, not essential. And I have a feeling that there's something more profound happening in those things we call decorative.
Is that a pretend bite or a real bite?
Kidding.
Ah!
Bit in both, you know. Oh, God.
But do you use a lot of studies of animals' play in trying to define human play?
Yeah, I think the problem that it presents us is, the problem. She's biting a bit more now. She gets a bit keen after a while. The problem it presents us is what we have in common. I mean, if we look at human play, our ideas of it have to encompass what's happening here. Apparently, it's possible even at the animal level to know that, to make a discrimination between really hurting somebody and only pretending to hurt somebody, although I've got a little blood on this particular occasion. So that whatever we can't attribute too much to humankind. This is a very simple discrimination, apparently, occurring that early in evolution. And what's so difficult is that being human, we want to project our own meanings into the animal. We may be quite wrong. It may be something simpler than we can even conceptualize.
The kind of behaviour we call play in animals is behaviour that uses the motor patterns that also occur in other contexts, like fighting or predation, hunting for food and so on, or sexual behaviour. And these other contexts, the original context, if you like, have an obvious biological value. They're connected with that species' survival. There are a number of ways in which you could identify the difference in the quality of the motor patterns as they occur in the playful context and as they occur in their original context. Exaggeration is one obvious one. Repetition is another. Well, I see it most often in my cat, that if she's going to pounce on something, she will exaggerate the movement of pouncing so that she rears up in the air and then drops down on whatever it is. It might be a little ball of paper or a leaf. And we'll call it play because it's repeated and because it's exaggerated. And also, of course, because it's a piece of paper that she's doing it with and not a mouse.
I encountered at the zoo a phenomenon well known to everybody. I saw two young monkeys playing. Their actions or signals were similar to, but not the same as those of combat. It was evident, even to the human observer, that the sequence as a whole was not combat, and evident that to the participant monkeys this was not combat. Now this phenomenon, play, could only occur if the participants were capable of some degree of meta-communication, i.e. of exchanging signals which would carry the message, "This is play."
Why has Gregory Bateson changed so much of the way in which we think about play?
I'm not sure that he changed it so much as clarified it. He made it absolutely clear that how we know when behaviour is play. He talked about, I mean, he's not the only one, but he's the one who wrote it most beautifully, from my point of view, he talks about meta-communication, or communication about the nature of the communication that is to follow, signals about signals. And really, one of the simplest examples of this, to go back to the beginning of our conversation, is the chimpanzee's play face, in which, as long as the chimpanzee has announced to his peer, with the use of the play face, which is just the lower row of teeth showing and a peculiar kind of guttural noise that goes along with it at the same time, as long as he said that, everything that follows is set within the framework that announces this is play.
The other thing that Bateson said, which is very important, is that the play frame is not just sort of a special place, but it's an invented place. In other words, either through signals or negotiations, I get you to go with me into this world which I make up. And that's like making concepts or making ideas. And for him, that's one of the most remarkable things about what children do, is that they're really creating novel realms or new worlds in their own play. And it's presumably because of that, that's the first basis for what later becomes invention. It isn't invention yet, but it may well be if these kind of habits become generalized to ordinary behavior later on. He says that when a child plays, in a sense, he's constructing a social world. He's doing two things. First, he's giving you a signal. He might say, like that. And there's two things when he does that. First, he signals by his noises and so on that this is not what it's supposed to be, a mandolin. It's a machine gun. And then by the noises, he also says, let's play guns. Let's be crooks and robbers, things of that kind. There are always two elements. And this is, to Bateson, an essential part of social invention and social construction. What is she doing? She's both a mother and a not mother at the same time, which was the wonderful paradox of play, that you take on the world, but you know it's not the world.
Is this house a spaceship?
Yeah. We have to make our own food.
How fast are you going?
200 miles per hour. And we can go faster. We can go 10,000 miles per hour we can go at. I'm going to turn it on. That's on full speed, but I'm going to turn it on full speed now. Oh! He's bumping on my side. Pouncy, 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 pouncy.
Now that kind of stuff, which we've always known about and regarded as sort of, just kid stuff, in Bateson, is the very beginning of a mind making a reality. We thought of it as irreality, but actually it's the act of minds creating worlds. Here's a little 3.5-year-old playing with a 2.5-year-old. Now, this is the girl, and she's going to run the game. And she's going to run with this little boy. He's a bit dumb, and she's going to be the baby, and she's going to make him the mother. So she begins, she says, say, go to sleep now. And he says, go to sleep now. Why? And she's in the baby role. Baby. Why? Because. No, say because. Because. Why? Because why? Not good. You're bad. Why? Because you spilled your milk. No, because I hit somebody. Yes, you did. Say, go to sleep now. Put your head down. Put your head down. No. Yes. No, and so on. But you can sort of see, here's the girl's running two roles. She's directing the play and acting in her own play.
And what are you doing?
I'm acting three roles. She's acting only two. And I'm acting four, actually, aren't I?
Yes.
Her two, his one, and mine.
And mine.
And yours. But in any case, you can see how complex it is. Yeah. And kids by the age of 3 are already setting up worlds, they're setting up stages, and they're putting actors on stages. Much of the time, the actors on the stages are toys and dolls and things, but they're directors rather than actors. Much of the time. But some of the times they're actors too. And usually a boss kid or the head kid gets to be the director most of the time. And a lot of what goes on from 3 through 7 is finding out who's really going to be the director. Kids at the age of 4, if you ask them who's the toughest kid, they say, I'm the toughest kid, you know. But when they get to the age of 7, they all say, he's the toughest kid, so he's running the show out there. That guy's the tough guy. They agree on it, and that kid will be most often the director. And that's the politics of play. And Bateson was talking about that too, that you're establishing social worlds and the political way of doing it.
Leave it alone!
The anthropologists pretty much see play as the negotiation of the players. I mean, it's a political thing, you see? It's not the content that's important to them, it's the fact that you argue and you fight and you dispute. Play is a kind of a model of power tactics. You can't teach bribery in grade 1 and blackmail in grade 2 and deceit in grade 3, so the kids learn it in the playground. Organising games, getting it started. This is the kind of thing that Bateson and the communication theorists place so much attention to. Children will often spend more time arguing and discussing what they're going to do than doing it. They're learning about who can do what, who's dominant and who's subordinate, how you fit in. And the whole of childhood, for them, is partly regarded as a learning of those social signals and those social rules. Most playgrounds look like chaos to most adults, but very seldom anything ever happens. There are very few accidents on most playgrounds, even these hard, small ones. They have a choreography to them. Children know which way to move, where they can move fast and where they should move slowly and so on. There's a public social system of rules and a private social system of rules, and you get your best friends into your private social systems where you wink at each other and you smile and you agree to connive at hedging on the interpretation of whether a rule was observed or not observed and things of that kind. And there's a lot more in play that has to do with that public-private distinction than has generally been recognised in the past. Games are much more than a learning of rule systems, they're learning a duality of rule systems.
Who invented the rules of how to play marbles?
Well, we can make it up as we go along, or you make it up before anyone says it, and then they have to obey what you say.
Why do they have to obey what you say?
Because you said it before them.
So the first one who invents the rules...
Yeah, you have to go along with it.
Did you invent the rules for this game?
No, we didn't invent any rules, we're just playing fair.
How can you play fairly if you haven't invented the rules?
Well, so that they wanted to invent the rule, then that person may think that you're just trying to do it just to get all your marbles off. So we didn't invent any rules, so we're just playing all right.
So it's a distinction between really a personal set of rules and a public set of rules. And your question had to do with a public set of rules, and her answer has to do with a personal set of rules. And that's a marvellous dichotomy. It runs all the way through social life and is exhibited by this kind of apparently very ambiguous response. Sometimes one can see play as a kind of a continual sea-like or seaweed-like movement, continuing on at all times. It's not sort of something that just starts and just stops. We've talked that way with signals and so on, but with children it's almost like it's an incessant underground activity that can hardly ever be made to stop unless you've really got the attention focused on something else. So it's not surprising we see it here, even though they're, formally speaking, getting ready to go into school. Very few of them are just standing waiting. Many of them are continuing some remnant of the play activity they've been carrying on with beforehand. Although they've begun to accommodate to the adult expectancies of their behaviour there, they're still continuing pockets of their own play activity. And there are all kinds of stereotypes of how you play to cameras, and usually by doing cheeky things or poking your fingers on the end of your nose or something of that kind. You know.
But the paradox is that we're trying to resist that because we're wanting to observe how they play.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, what we're rejecting is one important aspect of how they play, which is how they play if we're there.
Yeah, that's true. So the anthropologist then, or Bateson in particular, Gregory Bateson in particular, seeing play as a kind of communication, is talking about it as a negotiation, as a kind of signalling, and as an imparting of a basically new idea to somebody else. Another kind of theory, another kind of seriousness is Piaget. He's really, I would say, a major force in the revival of play. Because of him, play is an essential part of mental activity. That is, whatever happens seriously must then be kind of assimilated into the mind, and the child works that through in himself. So it consolidates his other knowledge. That's that kind of theory.
Play begins then with the first association between assimilation and accommodation. After learning to grasp, swing, throw, etc., the child, sooner or later, grasps for the pleasure of grasping, swings for the sake of swinging. In a word, he repeats his behaviour not in any further effort to learn or to investigate, but for the mere joy of mastering it and showing off to himself his own power of subduing reality.
But is Piaget saying that there are certain levels of childhood development when you can notice through what kind of play activity they do as to what sort of development stage they've reached?
Yeah, sure. There are a whole series of steps and stairs, and the child presumably, if he's not working at the right steps and stairs, he hasn't made it yet. You could really use play diagnostically. Everybody has said that. You can look at a kid's play and tell yourself where he is. The play of an infant is a motor kind of play. The kid's playing with his fingers and he's spitting. Yeah, the first kind of play is probably with spittle on the lips. You go. The baby does a raspberry and the parent imitates raspberry like this, and you get this kind of communication. Then you get into symbolic play with little toys, the second, third years of life, then you get to, with other kids, dramatic kind of play, 4 through 7 years, and then you're into games.
But do you think toys also are part of a controlling, socialising world of children?
Very much. Let's take this, for example. What is the message we're supposed to get? Well, if you give a little boy this, you are saying, it's okay, armies are good, we have armies, American army's a good army, and you can pretend to be a powerful member driving along, and I mean, if you have a lifetime of this, all other things being equal, you end up being a good patriotic little soldier. Sure, socialising, or... The funny thing about fire engines, I mean, I've made that story there, but I suppose the probabilities of you end up being in the fire brigade, even though you had one of these, is rather low. There are kinds of stereotypes of toys. We tend to pick the adventure things, don't we? What we have is excitement stereotypes. The basic difference is the girl has a doll and the boy has a truck. This is the kind of universal archetype. But the girl is arranging a world too. Take Barbie dolls. I mean, they come with their own worlds. They provide the worlds to go with them. Here's Barbie, and she has a leisure wagon, I think this is called, a leisure wagon, and in which she can wash up, clean up, change her clothes, and she has an umbrella if she wants to go and sit outside in the sun, and she can sit in here and have her dinner, or she can sit in the wagon there and make it move around. This is actually kind of a compromise, very interesting thing going on. As girls are now being thought of in more active kinds of ways, they're being given more vehicles. Although notice it's a house vehicle, so it's kind of compromised. Just as boys are being given action dolls. Now boys weren't into dolls, weren't allowed to have dolls, they were allowed to have soldiers.
Yeah, this is what we're trying to aim at. We're trying to involve the child.
Tank attack negative. Repeat, negative. Now employing infiltration tactics, but under heavy pressure. They have a machine gunner on the roof and a sniper in the doorway. But we've a rope to a window outside their line of fire. And Frogman unit has breached perimeter defenses through manhole exit in courtyard. Watch that sniper number 2. I'm worried about that machine gun. Any chance of helicopter support?
What I'm looking at now is not the mastery, not the psychoanalytic way in which you become transformed and more courageous, not the Piagetian way in which you consolidate your intellectual skills, not the Batesonian way in which you create new worlds and negotiate your way in and out of them and across the boundaries, not the Berlinian way in which you respond to different novel stimuli and explore and learn that way, but in an entirely different way, because those ways don't really answer what we know about human civilization and play across history and play across different groups. And I've sort of framed 3 other meanings. I'd make that the mastery meaning. What I'm doing here is I'm saying, let's look at play from the inside of the player for a change and see what difference that makes. And the other meanings are that play's passionate, that it's secret, and that it's trivial. Let me take the triviality first, because that's the greatest contrast. Most people spend most of their playtime just ruminating. Well, I was thinking about yesterday, I was down by the beach, and so on they go. And it turns out that people who have these complex daydreams are very adequate kind of people. And yet they didn't know they were doing anything useful. They were just ruminating, as we would driving a car, or even when you're listening to me give a lecture. You can be off playing in your cotton-picking head and not listening. If you ask adults, what do you do for your recreation? What's exciting? What do they tell you? Oh, I just talk, or I just walk. The bulk of people are not very active in their play. So most of our images of play aren't that kind of talk. That's the kind we want to put down. We hate to see people idling. And yet I think, my guess is that through the bulk of history, through the bulk of our lives, that's the dominant type, idling. We go to play of the more active type rather than the more idling type, because that's where the action is and that's where the excitement is. The other meaning we haven't talked much about, and that's play as a kind of a secret, inversive event. Graffiti's a kind of an inverted kind of play. You have these pirates in society playing a contest against society. Very clear that that's antithetical. I think that all play is probably slightly antithetical, but then we have these extreme forms of it. That's so that all play is slightly exciting, even your ruminations, but we have these extreme forms of excitement, the passionate game. All play is probably allows a certain amount of doing anything you like the idling in your head. All play is a kind of accomplishment too, a kind of skill, so that all these meanings are relevant. But what I'm saying is the century is concentrated on mastery, and I think we ought to look as much as a central aspect of play at idling, at passion, and at inversion or secrecy. Play busts out of the jacket of function. It can go in many directions, but a lot of it predicts to nothing but the excitement and the fun of being alive and vividly enjoying yourself at the moment. You have to think about what makes life worth living, and play clearly does.
Ah.